The morning began, as every morning had for the past 8 years, at precisely 5:47 a.m. Antonio Vincenzo didn't need an alarm. His body had been calibrated to the rhythm of survival long before most men learned to shave. He rose from Egyptian cotton sheets in a penthouse that resembled less a home and more a fortress. Reinforced concrete walls, bulletproof windows that filtered the nascent dawn into something clinical and cold, and surveillance feeds that blinked silently in the corner of his bedroom like mechanical guardian angels. The shower ran exactly 4 minutes. The espresso machine, imported from Milan, maintained weekly, produced 2 shots, no sugar, no deviation. His suit, a charcoal Tom Ford with subtle pinstripes, had been pressed and laid out the night before by his housekeeper, a woman whose grandmother had worked for his grandfather. Trust, in Antonio's world, was an inheritance, carefully curated across generations. By 6:15, he stood before the floor-length mirror, adjusting his tie with the precision of a surgeon. The man staring back at him was a monument to control. Not a hair displaced, not a wrinkle visible, not a single element of chaos permitted. His face, handsome in a severe way, betrayed nothing, not the 3 hours of sleep, not the knot of tension that lived permanently between his shoulder blades, not the weight of running an empire built on fear and loyalty in equal measure. The elevator descended through 12 floors of fortified architecture. Antonio checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, another inheritance. And noted he was 17 seconds ahead of schedule. Acceptable variance. The underground garage waited like a cathedral to power. Fluorescent lights hummed over a fleet of black SUVs, each one armored, each one swept twice daily for tracking devices and explosives. Marco Bellini, his head of security, stood beside the lead vehicle, thick-armed and granite-faced, reviewing something on a tablet. "Morning, boss," Marco said without looking up. "Routes are clear. Teams in position." Antonio nodded. The choreography of his movements had been refined to an art form, the same route to the same meetings, the same backup routes memorized, the same contingencies planned for scenarios he prayed would never materialize. Predictability, he'd learned, was often mistaken for weakness. But predictability executed with overwhelming force, that was invincibility. He slid into the back seat of the lead SUV, the leather cool against his back. Behind him, 2 more vehicles fired to life, their engines a synchronized growl. The convoy would move through the district like a precision instrument, 3 minutes to the main road, 8 minutes through the commercial sector, arriving at the waterfront property at exactly 7:03 a.m. for the meeting that would determine the next quarter's territorial agreements. Everything sacred. Everything certain. Everything under his absolute control. The garage door began its slow mechanical ascent, revealing the ramp that led to the street. Daylight spilled in, harsh and unforgiving. Antonio's driver shifted into gear. And that's when she appeared. The girl materialized like an apparition in the brightening dawn, small, blonde, no more than 7 years old, wearing a white t-shirt that seemed to glow against the shadows of the garage ramp. She stood directly in the path of 3 tons of armored steel, her sneakers planted on the concrete with a resolve that belonged to someone who'd lived far longer than her years suggested. Antonio's driver hit the brakes. The convoy lurched to a halt with a chorus of squealing rubber. "What the?" Marco was already moving, hand instinctively reaching for the weapon beneath his jacket, barking orders into his radio. "We have a breach. Civilian in the..." "Wait." Antonio's voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. He leaned forward, studying the child through the windshield. She wasn't running. Wasn't crying. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, fear, yes, but controlled fear. Her eyes, wide and blue, locked onto his with an urgency that made something ancient in his gut tighten. She knew which vehicle he was in. "Sir, we need to move. This could be a..." I said wait. Antonio opened the door himself, ignoring Marco's muttered curse. His leather shoes touched concrete as the girl took a half step forward, her small hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Please," she gasped, her voice high and trembling but determined. "Please, you can't drive. You can't. There's something wrong. Under the cars." Antonio felt the world narrow to a pinpoint. Around him, his security team fanned out, weapons drawn but lowered, confusion etched across their faces. A child. An unarmed, terrified child had breached a security perimeter that had taken millions to construct. He crouched, bringing himself to her eye level, his movements slow and deliberate. "What's your name?" "Chloe." She gulped air. "Chloe Parker. My mom, she works at the diner on 5th. I saw him. The scared man." "What scared man?" "He was touching your cars. Last night. Late. She touched her own cheek, drawing a line down from her eye. A scar. Right here. And he kept looking around like someone was gonna hurt him. He put things underneath. I heard ticking." The temperature in Antonio's blood dropped 10 degrees. He glanced up at Marco, whose expression had shifted from irritation to something harder, more dangerous. "How did you get in here?" Antonio asked softly. "The side door. By the trash. It doesn't lock right." Her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to tell the police, but they said I was making up stories. But I'm not. I swear I'm not. You have to believe me." Antonio Vincenzo had built an empire on certainty, on never trusting instinct over intelligence. But instinct was screaming now. "Marco," he said quietly, rising to his full height. "Check the vehicles. All of them." "Sir. Now." Marco moved with the methodical efficiency of a man who dismantled car bombs in 3 different war zones before his 30th birthday. He dropped to his knees beside the lead SUV, pulling a compact LED flashlight from his jacket. The beam cut through the shadows beneath the chassis like a scalpel. Antonio stood motionless, one hand resting lightly on Chloe's shoulder, whether to comfort her or keep her from running, he wasn't entirely sure. The girl trembled beneath his palm, her breath still coming in short, frightened gasps. Around them, the garage had transformed into a frozen tableau, security personnel in defensive positions, hands on weapons, eyes scanning for threats that might emerge from the ordinary concrete and steel. "Boss." Marco's voice carried a tone Antonio had heard only twice before, once in Mogadishu, once in Kandahar. Both times, it had preceded explosions. "We've got a problem." He didn't stand. Didn't move. Just aimed the flashlight beam upward so Antonio could see. The device was small, no larger than a smartphone, affixed to the undercarriage with industrial magnets. Black casing. A tiny LCD screen displaying numbers that descended with mechanical indifference, 47 minutes and 23 seconds. 47 minutes and 22 seconds, 47 minutes and 21 seconds. "Check the others," Antonio said, his voice flat as hammered steel. Marco scrambled to the second SUV. 30 seconds later, here too. Same placement. Same countdown. The third vehicle yielded identical results. "They're synced," Marco reported, sliding out from beneath the rear SUV, his expensive shirt now streaked with grease and dust. "Professional work. Military-grade magnets. Whoever placed these knew exactly what they were doing." Antonio's mind raced through calculations with the cold precision that had kept him alive through 2 decades of territorial wars. 3 devices. Perfectly synchronized. Placed with expertise. But something felt wrong. Off-key in a symphony of violence he'd learned to read like sheet music. "The countdown," he said. 47 minutes. That's specific. Too specific. "Could be time delayed to catch us in transit," Marco suggested, already pulling out his phone. "I'll get the bomb squad." No. Antonio held up one hand. He turned to Chloe, crouching again to meet her eyes. This scared man. Did you see what he put under the cars? Did it look like what's there now? She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. He had a bag. A black bag. He kept checking his phone. And there was another man. In a car across the street. Watching. What kind of car? Dark blue. I think. With government plates. Like the police but not police. Marco's expression darkened. Federal. Antonio stood slowly, his jaw tightening. A bomb would be simple. Brutal. Final. But federal surveillance. Coordinated placement. A countdown designed to be discovered. This wasn't an assassination. This was a trap. And he'd almost driven straight into it. Antonio guided Chloe to a bench near the garage wall, away from the vehicles and the growing tension that crackled through his security team like electricity before a storm. He sat beside her, his 6-foot frame folding with surprising gentleness, and pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, monogrammed, pristine white, offering it to her. She took it, dabbing at her eyes, her small fingers trembling. Chloe, he said quietly, I need you to think very carefully. This man with the scar. Can you describe him for me? Everything you remember. She nodded, her breath steadying as she focused on the memory. He was tall. Not as tall as you, but tall. Thin. Like he hadn't eaten in a while. His clothes were nice but they didn't fit right anymore. Antonio felt something cold slide down his spine. The scar, he pressed gently. Where exactly? Her finger traced a line from her left temple down across her cheekbone. Here. It was thick. Old. And his hands. They shook when he was working. He kept stopping to wipe them on his pants. Marco had moved closer, listening with the intensity of a hunting dog catching a scent. Boss, that sounds like. Describe his face, Antonio interrupted, his voice tight. His eyes. His hair. Dark hair. Gray at the sides. His eyes were, she paused, searching for the word. Sad. Really sad. Like my mom's eyes when she's worried about rent. And he kept talking to himself. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his lips were moving the whole time. The pieces fell into place with the terrible clarity of a puzzle Antonio had been trying not to solve for 3 years. Luca. The name left his mouth like a curse. Luca Moretti. Marco's hand tightened on his weapon. Jesus Christ. You sure? Antonio was sure. Luca Moretti, a lieutenant who'd once sat at Antonio's right hand, who'd helped build half the legitimate fronts that kept their operation running. A man who'd been caught skimming, who'd begged for mercy on his knees in an office not unlike this garage, swearing on his mother's grave he'd disappear forever. Antonio had shown mercy. A rarity. A calculated risk. He'd marked Luca, literally, with the scar Chloe had just described, and sent him into exile with a warning. Vanish completely, or the next meeting wouldn't end with just a knife across the face. He vanished 3 years ago, Marco said, thinking aloud. Dropped off every radar. We figured he'd left the state. Or he got picked up, Antonio murmured, the implication spreading through his mind like blood in water. Federal agents love a man with grievances and inside knowledge. Chloe watched them both, her young face creased with confusion but also recognition. She'd seen enough of the world to know when adults were discussing something dangerous. Did I do the right thing? She asked, her voice small. Antonio looked at her, this child who'd risked everything to warn a stranger. You saved my life, he said simply. Marco had one of the devices on a workbench now, its black casing pried open with surgical precision. The guts of the machine lay exposed beneath the harsh fluorescent light, circuits, batteries, and something that made Antonio's strategic mind recalibrate every assumption he'd made in the last 20 minutes. "It's not a bomb," Marco said, his voice carrying equal parts relief and dread. "Not even close." Antonio moved closer, studying the compact array of electronics. "Explain." "GPS transmitter. High grade. Military spec." Marco pointed to a chip no larger than a thumbnail. "This thing could track us to within 3 feet anywhere in the city. And this," he indicated a second component, "is a cellular relay. It's broadcasting." "Broadcasting what?" "Our position. Speed. Direction. Everything." Marco's jaw tightened. "And this beauty here? Remote kill switch. Not for explosives. For the vehicle systems. Someone with the right code could shut down our entire fleet simultaneously. Leave us dead in the water wherever they chose." The implications crystallized with brutal clarity. Antonio paced the length of the garage, his mind assembling the operation from the enemy's perspective. Luca places the devices, probably under duress or promise of immunity. Federal handlers monitor the convoy's movements in real time, waiting for the perfect moment. A specific location, maximum exposure, minimal collateral damage. "They were going to box us in," Antonio said, the words coming as he thought them. "Probably at the waterfront. Open space, public access, easy to seal off. They shut down the vehicles, flood the zone with agents, and suddenly Antonio Vincenzo is surrounded by federal law enforcement with nowhere to run." "But we're not wanted for anything," Marco protested. "The legitimate businesses are clean. The books are clean. We've been careful. Doesn't matter." Antonio stopped pacing, turning to face his security chief. "They don't need evidence if they manufacture the scene. 3 armored vehicles, known associates, suspicious behavior in a high-profile location. They hold us for 72 hours while they tear apart every property we own. By the time lawyers get us out, the damage is done. Accounts frozen. Partners spooked. Competitors moving into our territory. It's not an arrest," Marco breathed. "It's a demolition." "Exactly." Antonio glanced at his watch. The countdown on the devices read 38 minutes. "They're expecting us to move. The meet at the waterfront, half the district's power players will be there. They probably have surveillance set up already, waiting for us to drive into their net." Marco's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more predatory. "So what do we do?" Antonio looked back at Chloe, still sitting on the bench, small and brave and completely unaware she'd just unraveled a federal operation months in the planning. Then his gaze moved to the devices, to the ticking countdown, to the invisible web that had been spun around his empire. A slow, cold smile touched his lips. "We give them exactly what they're expecting," he said quietly. "Just not the way they planned." Antonio pulled out his phone, scrolling through the district databases people maintained, every resident, every business owner, every face that lived within his sphere of influence. 5th Street Diner. Parker. He found her in seconds, Sophia Parker, 29, single mother, worked double shifts 6 days a week. Clean record. No connections to law enforcement or rival operations. Except now her daughter was standing in his garage, having somehow known exactly when and where to intercept him. "Chloe," he said, keeping his voice gentle but firm. "How did you know I'd be leaving this morning? Right now, at this exact time?" The girl's face flushed, her eyes dropping to her sneakers. I just guessed. You're a smart girl. Too smart to guess." He crouched beside her again. "Did someone tell you my schedule?" Her lip trembled. Tears welled up again, spilling over despite her obvious effort to hold them back. "Please don't hurt my mom. Please." She didn't want to, they made her. Antonio felt Marco tense behind him, but he kept his focus on Chloe, on the terror now radiating from this brave child who'd risked everything. "Nobody's going to hurt your mother," he said quietly. "I promise you. But I need to understand what happened. Can you tell me?" The story came out in broken fragments, punctuated by hitching breaths. 2 weeks ago, men had come to the diner after closing. Federal badges, serious faces. They'd shown Sophia photographs. Chloe walking home from school, sitting in the park, playing with friends. The message was clear without ever being spoken: cooperate, or your daughter becomes a casualty of something much larger than a waitress could possibly understand. "They wanted to know about you," Chloe whispered. "Your schedule. When you came to the diner for coffee. What time. What you ordered. Everything." Antonio did stop there, every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:45 a.m., a brief pause in his routine for espresso and the morning papers. A ritual so ingrained it had become invisible. Sophia would have noticed. Would have known his patterns better than most of his own security team. She wrote it all down, Chloe continued. They gave her a phone. A special one. She had to text them every time she learned something new. "And yesterday they told her you were in danger. That something bad was going to happen this morning, but she wasn't supposed to warn you. She wasn't supposed to do anything. But she told you," Antonio said. Chloe nodded fiercely. She was crying. All last night. She kept saying she was sorry, over and over. So I waited until she fell asleep, and I came here. Because even if you're who they say you are, my mom doesn't want anybody to die." Antonio stood slowly, his mind recalibrating once more. The operation was even more sophisticated than he'd realized. They'd pressured a civilian, turned her into an unwitting intelligence asset, and now Sophia Parker was a loose end. Which meant she and her daughter were both in immediate danger. "Marco," Antonio said quietly. "Get them both. Now." Antonio stepped away from the bench, pulling a secondary phone from his inner jacket pocket, one of 3 he carried, each with different purposes, different levels of security. This one connected to a network most people in his world pretended didn't exist, the gray zone where organized crime and legitimate law enforcement found common ground. He dialed a number he'd committed to memory 5 years ago and never written down. 3 rings. Then a voice, gravelly from too many cigarettes and too little sleep. "It's early, Antonio. Captain Russo. I need a favor." Detective Captain Vincent Russo, 28 years with the city police, decorated, respected, and pragmatic enough to understand that sometimes the best way to keep civilians safe was to work with the devils you knew rather than the ones you didn't. He and Antonio had an arrangement. Information flowed both ways, territories remained stable, and the bodies stayed off the streets where children played. "I'm listening," Russo said, his tone shifting to something more alert. Antonio outlined the situation with clinical precision: the devices, the federal operation, Sophia Parker's coerced cooperation, and the trap that was currently counting down toward his scheduled departure time. He left nothing out. In situations like this, half-truths were more dangerous than silence. Russo was quiet for a long moment. Federal task force. Probably out of the district office. They've been sniffing around organized crime operations for months, trying to make headlines before the election cycle. "Can you confirm who's running it?" "Give me 10 minutes. The line clicked dead. Antonio turned to Marco, who was already issuing orders into his radio, redirecting resources with the efficiency of a general repositioning troops. "I want Sophia Parker picked up within the hour. Protective custody. Use the safe house on 7th. Nobody outside our immediate circle knows about it. Already on it. Teams rolling now. And pull our surveillance from the waterfront. Every camera, every angle. I want a complete record of who's in position there, what vehicles they're using, and how they're deployed. Marco nodded, already typing on his tablet. What about the countdown? We've got 31 minutes before these devices hit zero. Let them run. Antonio's smile was cold, calculated. Let the Federals think everything is going according to plan. His phone buzzed. Russo, faster than expected. Task Force Vanguard, the captain said without preamble. Led by Special Agent Marcus Chen. 3 years of cases thrown out on technicalities. He's desperate for a win, and word is he's been cutting corners to get it. Using informants of questionable reliability. Bending protocols. Bending or breaking? That's the question, isn't it? Russo's tone carried dark amusement. If someone had evidence of federal agents coercing civilians, conducting surveillance without proper warrants, or collaborating with known felons to manufacture probable cause, well, that would be quite the scandal. Antonio's mind was already 3 moves ahead, seeing the chessboard with perfect clarity. Vincent, he said quietly, how would you feel about making some arrests today? Antonio returned to the bench where Chloe sat, her small frame dwarfed by the industrial surroundings. She looked up at him with those wide blue eyes, terrified but trusting, a combination that made something uncomfortable shift in his chest. He'd spent 2 decades building walls between himself and anything resembling vulnerability. This child was dismantling them with nothing but her presence. He knelt before her, bringing himself to her level once more. Chloe, I need you to do something very important. Something very brave. She straightened slightly, wiping her face with his handkerchief. Okay. Do you know the old church? St. Michael's, 3 blocks from your apartment. She nodded. We go there sometimes. For food donations when mom's tips are bad. Antonio pushed past the pang of guilt. Later, he'd make sure Sophia Parker never worried about tips again, and focused on the immediate crisis. Behind the church, there's a garden. Stone benches. A statue of an angel. Do you know it? Yes. Under the 3rd bench from the left, there's a metal box. It's painted green, looks like it belongs there. Inside that box is a phone. A red phone. He pulled a small key from his pocket, one he'd carried for emergencies he'd prayed would never materialize. This key opens it. Chloe took the key with careful fingers, studying it like a sacred artifact. When you open the phone, it will automatically dial a number. A woman will answer. Her name is Dr. Elena Costa. You will tell her exactly these words, Protocol 7. The garden needs tending. Can you remember that? Protocol 7, Chloe repeated, her voice steadying with purpose. The garden needs tending. Good. She'll ask you questions. You answer them honestly. Tell her everything, about your mother, about the men who threatened her, about what you saw last night. Everything. She'll know what to do. Marco appeared at Antonio's shoulder, his expression questioning. Protocol 7 was a nuclear option, a direct line to one of the city's most prominent civil rights attorneys, a woman whose reputation for destroying corrupt law enforcement operations was legendary. Activating it meant burning bridges, exposing operations, and trusting that the fallout would hurt his enemies more than himself. Sir, are you sure about this? Marco murmured. Once that call is made. I'm sure. Antonio stood, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder. 2 of my men will escort you. They'll stay out of sight, but they'll keep you safe. When you're done, they'll bring you to where your mother is. You'll both be protected until this is over. Chloe clutched the key, her knuckles white. What if I mess up? What if I forget the words? Antonio smiled, a real smile, rare and genuine. You won't. You're the bravest person I've met in a very long time. She nodded, standing with a determination that belonged to someone 3 times her age. Protocol 7, she whispered to herself. The garden needs tending. The sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows across the city's rooftops. Antonio stood on the highest point of his territory, a converted warehouse building whose top floor commanded views of the entire district. Behind him, Marco maintained position near the stairwell access, his presence a silent guarantee of security. Below, the waterfront gleamed in the morning light. Antonio could see the federal vehicles positioned at strategic intervals, unmarked but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read a tactical deployment. They were waiting for a convoy that would never arrive. The rooftop door opened with a metallic groan. Luca Moretti emerged, flanked by two of Antonio's men, his hands zip-tied in front of him. He'd been picked up 20 minutes ago at a motel on the outskirts of the district. Exactly where Antonio's network said he'd be, waiting for confirmation that the operation had succeeded. The scar looked worse than Antonio remembered. It cut a ragged path down Luca's face, a permanent reminder of mercy that had curdled into this moment. The man had lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. His eyes, when they met Antonio's, carried the haunted quality Chloe had described. Sad, desperate, and far too aware of how this might end. Sit him down, Antonio said quietly. They guided Luca to a folding chair positioned near the roof's edge. Not close enough to be a threat, but close enough that the drop behind him was a constant presence in his peripheral vision. Antonio approached slowly, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. 3 years, Luca. You had 3 years to disappear. To build a new life somewhere I'd never look. Luca's voice came out hoarse, fractured. They found me in Atlanta. 6 months after you, after the scar. They knew everything. Showed me photographs of my sister, my nephew. Said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't come back and help them take you down, they'd manufacture charges. Put my family through hell. So you put a child in danger instead. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Luca's head dropped, his shoulders shaking. I didn't know I tried to warn Sophia to keep her daughter away. I never wanted. But you did. Antonio's voice remained level, surgical. You planted those devices. You fed them intelligence. You helped them build a trap that would have destroyed everything I've built, put dozens of people out of work, and destabilized this entire district. They said it would be clean. An arrest. Nothing violent. They promised. They promised. Antonio laughed, a sound without humor. Luca, you were a lieutenant. You know what promises from federals are worth. The wind picked up, tugging at their clothes. In the distance, sirens began to wail, not heading toward the waterfront, but away from it, converging on a federal field office where Captain Russo and his people were executing warrants based on evidence Dr. Costa had already begun compiling. Antonio pulled out his phone, turning the screen toward Luca. Let me show you what your cooperation bought. The phone screen displayed a live feed, multiple camera angles stitched together with professional precision. Antonio watched Luca's face as comprehension slowly dawned, the scar on his cheek seeming to deepen with each passing second. Recognize the location? Antonio asked. The waterfront. Every angle covered. Federal agents in tactical gear positioned behind vehicles, checking weapons, coordinating through earpieces. Special Agent Marcus Chen stood at the center of it all, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression growing increasingly agitated as the minutes ticked past Antonio's scheduled arrival time. We've been recording since 6 a.m., Antonio continued, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. Every face. Every vehicle. Every piece of equipment. But more importantly, he swiped to a different feed, we've been recording audio. This footage was grainier, taken from inside a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from the waterfront. Chen's voice came through clearly, discussing the operation with his team. The words were damning, references to falsified surveillance warrants, to using Luca's intelligence without corroborating evidence, to coercing a civilian informant through threats against her child. Luca's voice cracked. That's not possible. They sweep for bugs constantly. They have counter-surveillance protocols. They do, Marco interjected from his position near the door. Good ones, too. But they were looking for external threats. They weren't expecting their star informant to be wearing a wire. Luca's eyes widened in horror. No. I never. Antonio pulled a small device from his pocket, a transmitter no larger than a button, sophisticated enough to defeat most detection sweeps. Your jacket. The one they gave you 2 days ago for the final meeting. Beautiful craftsmanship. Italian wool. Probably cost more than you made in a month when you worked for me. You bugged it, Luca whispered. Before they even gave it to me. We have sources in the federal evidence locker. It pays to have friends in unexpected places. Antonio pocketed the device. Every conversation you've had with Chen and his team for the past 48 hours has been recorded. Every illegal order. Every threat. Every corner they cut in their desperation to make this case. He swiped to another screen, transcripts, time-stamped and annotated. References to Sophia Parker. Discussions about manipulating evidence. Conversations about media strategy, about using a public arrest to pressure Antonio into cooperating with broader investigations that had nothing to do with actual crimes and everything to do with political theater. Dr. Costa has copies of everything, Antonio said. So does Captain Russo. So do 3 federal judges who aren't on Chen's payroll. By noon, so will the New York Times. Luca stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. Below, on the waterfront, the federal agents were beginning to disperse, orders clearly coming down from somewhere up the chain, the operation scrubbed before it could become an even larger disaster. They're done, Antonio said quietly. And so are you. Luca's hands trembled in the zip ties, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The reality of his situation was crystallizing with brutal clarity. He betrayed Antonio, endangered a child, and now sat on a rooftop with nowhere to run and no cards left to play. You're going to kill me, he said, the words flat, resigned. After everything, that's how this ends. Antonio studied him for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. That would be the expected move. The traditional response to betrayal. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But I've learned something today about the limits of tradition. He pulled out his phone again, navigating to a different screen, this one showing a residential street, modest homes with small yards, children's toys scattered on lawns. The camera zoomed in on one house in particular, where a woman in her 50s sat on a porch swing, reading a book. Beside her, a young boy, maybe 10. Kicked a soccer ball against the side of the house. Luca's face drained of color. Maria. And Tomas. No. Please, Antonio, they have nothing to do with. Your sister and nephew, Antonio confirmed. Currently under the protection of 4 of my best people. They don't know it, of course. To them, the nice couple who moved in across the street last month are just friendly neighbors. The contractor working on the phone lines is just doing his job. They're completely unaware that they've been safe for the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Luca's voice cracked. But Chen only approached me. Chen approached you 8 weeks ago, Luca. Did you really think I wouldn't know the moment a federal agent made contact with one of my former associates? Antonio pocketed the phone. I've been watching this operation develop since its inception. I knew about Sophia Parker. I knew about the devices you'd plant. I knew Chen was using your family as leverage. Marco spoke from behind them, his tone almost conversational. Your sister received a very generous J. Luca stared at them, comprehension warring with disbelief. You protected them. Even knowing what I was going to do. I protected them because of what you were going to do, Antonio corrected. Because I needed you to believe your family was still in danger. Needed you desperate enough to follow through with Chen's plan. And because, he paused, his voice softening fractionally, unlike the people you chose to work with, I don't make war on children. He moved closer, crouching to meet Luca's eyes at level. Here's what happens next. You're going to testify. Everything you know about Task Force Vanguard, every illegal action, every threat they made. You'll cooperate fully with Dr. Costa's investigation. And if I refuse? Antonio smiled, cold and final. Then I withdraw my protection. And Maria and Tomas learn exactly what kind of danger you put them in. The afternoon sun painted the city in shades of amber and gold as Antonio's car pulled up to the safe house on 7th Street. It was an unassuming building, a renovated brownstone that blended seamlessly into the residential block, exactly the kind of place that disappeared into the urban landscape by design. Inside, Sophia Parker sat on a worn leather couch, her daughter curled against her side. Both had been crying, their faces blotchy and exhausted, but Chloe's eyes lit up when Antonio entered. She started to rise, but her mother's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders. "It's okay, Mom," Chloe whispered. "He's the one I told you about." Antonio removed his suit jacket, draping it over a nearby chair, and sat across from them. The formal distance felt necessary. These were civilians, people whose lives had been upended by forces they'd never asked to engage with. Special Agent Chen and 4 members of his task force were arrested 2 hours ago, he said quietly. Federal charges, coercion of witnesses, falsification of surveillance warrants, conspiracy to violate civil rights. Dr. Costa is confident they'll face significant prison time. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. They can't come back. They can't come back. Antonio leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You'll need to testify, eventually. Both of you. But Dr. Costa will be with you every step of the way. She's already arranged protection through channels that have nothing to do with me. Why? Sophia's voice was raw, confused. Why would you help us? We're nobody. I'm just a waitress who gave them information about you. You're a mother who was threatened, Antonio corrected gently. And your daughter is the reason I'm still alive. He turned his attention to Chloe. Protocol 7 worked perfectly, by the way. Dr. Costa said you were very brave. Chloe managed a small smile despite her exhaustion. Antonio reached into his inner pocket, withdrawing an envelope. He placed it on the coffee table between them, thick, unmarked, the weight of its contents obvious. There's enough in there for 6 months of rent. More if you're careful. Consider it payment for services rendered. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The diner on 5th is under new ownership as of this morning. The previous owner decided to retire. The new owner is looking for a manager. Someone who knows the business, knows the customers. The salary is substantially better than waitressing. Sophia stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. I can't, this is too much. I can't accept. You can and you will, Antonio said, his tone brooking no argument. Your daughter saved my life. In my world, debts like that are paid in full. He stood, collecting his jacket. Marco will check in periodically. If you need anything at all, you contact him. Understood? Sophia nodded mutely, clutching Chloe tighter. Antonio moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at the small blonde girl who'd stood in front of 3 tons of armored steel with nothing but courage and conviction. Thank you, Chloe, he said simply. She smiled, a real smile, bright and unguarded. You're welcome, Mr. Antonio. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Survivors, all of them. For now.